Hello, everyone. Dr. Yonit Arthur here. You are on The Steady Coach. And it is such a joy today to bring you another success story. This one is with Whitney. Whitney came down with symptoms of PPPD in May of 2022, went through months of suffering, no answers, found my channel in September of 2022, and has since made a full recovery from PPPD. Whitney is a business owner. She has 2 young children at home, and she gets really candid in this interview about what it was like to go through this experience. And I think you're going to resonate with her. If you're going through it right now, you're going to know exactly what she's talking about. But she also gives you some really actionable tools. She explains exactly what she did to get better. And I think you're going to learn a lot from this as well. So please enjoy this interview. And as always, if you enjoy this kind of content, let me know. Comment below, like, share, subscribe to my channel if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening to this on my podcast, please follow my podcast. Maybe even leave a review for my podcast. All of those things help me reach more people. All right, everyone, enjoy. Hey, Whitney.
Hi, Dr. Yo.
Hi. So good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, just like you said before we hit the record button, this was an aspiration of yours to get to this point when you were at your lowest point, right?
Absolutely. I watched a lot of other success stories that helped me borrow that belief that I was going to get better. And I told myself, okay, when I get better, I'm going to document it and I'm going to share it because maybe it will just be another hope for someone else that they can get better too.
Yes, I already know a lot of your story, and I am just so happy to have you here on camera sharing it too. I mean, I already shared the written version with my membership community, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, everything she said is just like me." But now seeing your face and seeing you actually share the story live is going to be even more impactful, I think, for people.
Well, I hope it helps. I hope it helps somebody.
I know it will. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Whitney. I live in Houston, Texas with my family, and I have 2 young children and a husband, and I am a business owner. So I feel like I have a very fulfilling, happy life. So many things to be grateful for. And, you know, overall, life is really good before all of this happened.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And this is something we're going to probably touch on later on that, excuse me, that often there's a misconception when people find my channel that I'm saying, oh, you must be severely traumatized and everything must be horrible. And that's what led to all this. It's not like that. A lot of the time, people are at the peaks of their lives frequently when this kind of stuff happens.
Yeah, I felt like everything was really going right before this happened. Like a lot of chips had fallen into place that maybe had taken a few years to really kind of get totally worked out. I felt very fortunate. I felt very blessed. Like, okay, everything is coming together in, you know, now that I'm 36 years old. So I feel like there's just a little bit of a different wisdom that I have on the back end of my 30s that I didn't have in my 20s. And just all the fruits of my labor had come to fruition, and then it happened and immediately was debilitating.
Yeah, I feel like when people, I mean, look, it doesn't matter where you are in your life when something like this happens, it's going to knock you on your butt. But when people are living like really good, high quality, productive lives, and then it happens, sometimes there's just a special devastation in that because
yeah,
how did this happen to me? Look where I was 6 months ago or 2 months ago.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time at the beginning. I guess you could call it a victim mindset. You feel like a victim. I don't want to downplay that at all, but I felt like, gosh, I did everything right. You know, I followed all these steps to get to where I wanted to go. And I am organized and I'm an achiever and I am, you know, self-motivated by nature. And why all of a sudden, what did I do to deserve this was sort of the mindset.
Yeah. Yes. And I want to hear more about that and how you pulled yourself out. But before we do that, What happened? Tell me how all this started.
So I can actually give you an exact date, May 19th, 2022. So it's been a little over a year. I was out walking with my son, perfect weather conditions. I live in a safe area. And I, in the middle of the day, just felt like extreme dizziness, almost like something bad was going to happen to me. I felt like that panic, like, oh my, like almost off kiltered. And my initial thought was, I don't have my cell phone with me to call for help. If something happens to me, what's going to happen to my, then 2-year-old out in the Texas heat outside, which was a strange feeling for me. And then, I was feeling that spinning, like true BPPV spinning, and was able to get my husband to come home. I went to the hospital. They ran all the tests. They couldn't come up with anything. They kept saying it was anxiety, but I kept feeling like that didn't track correctly. And then they finally said, okay, this does sound like vertigo. They gave me meclizine, I think is what they will give. I had high hopes. I thought, okay, well, I have an answer. I'm not crazy. This sounds awful. My dad has gotten vertigo a couple times before, so I had seen what that had done to him. And I just wasn't really getting better. And then, kept obviously going back to the doctors, trying to get answers, and, couldn't get any. And that was when they said anxiety. And I said, no. I was a believer that it was not just anxiety, but of course those feelings would bring that on. So I definitely felt like I was on a carousel all day. I didn't feel like anything made it better or worse. I felt even dizzy in my sleep, which was very consuming.
Did it wake you up at night and cause sleep problems? Yeah.
It did. And after a couple weeks of this happening, I had mentioned in my email to you that my sister-in-law is an occupational therapist. So she had found like a physical therapy location out here in Texas that they do specialize in balance. And so I called them, got an appointment, and that was where a physical therapist had done the Dix-Hallpike on me, or diagnosed me with the Epley. I think the Epley, or I forget which one it is, but
they did the whole maneuver to fix the crystal situation. And
yeah. And I did have the eye movements. So that was where they were like, okay, you absolutely have vertigo because you have these involuntary eye movements when we do these certain manipulations. So, we're going to do these certain things, exercises. We don't recommend you do the YouTube videos at home the way that people are doing, because you can actually, I guess you can really hurt yourself that way. That makes sense. And so I had gone a few times, and that seemed to really make it better.
So it made the vertigo, the spinning better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Not spinning like a carousel. And then after about a month of going a couple times a week, I didn't have the eye movements anymore. And so they were pretty stumped. They were like, okay. And I said, I'm not spinning anymore. I'm better. I can do things, but I feel strange. And this is where I did have a lot of visual issues with it. And that was very alarming because I thought, okay, well, I wear contact lenses. I get my eyes checked every year. Usually have to get a little bit of a stronger prescription every year. That happens to lots of people. Nothing to be afraid of, but I couldn't explain why things looked weird and why things felt weird. Driving was very difficult for me. I am not someone who suffers from panic attacks, but I would almost always have a panic attack driving. The worst one was when it was raining. Obviously now I understand why. And I felt like I couldn't even get behind the vehicle. Actually, what I would do is I would take my phone and hook it up to the system in the car, the hands-free, and I would play your YouTube videos.
Oh my gosh.
To hear your voice while I was driving saying, you're not broken. This is why your brain's doing this. And I would just have to go like a 10-minute drive, like drop kids to school or something like that. But it made me feel like, okay, you can do this. But that was later when I found you, because I didn't find you for the first few months of this. But I just really couldn't do anything. I mean, I could barely wash my hair because I was so dizzy.
Tell me more about those visual symptoms. Like what? So things, it sounds like certain patterns and just kind of busy, like moving stuff messed with you. Is that right? Or was there more to it than that?
I know for some people in your videos, driving made it better. Driving made it worse for me. I do live in a high traffic area though. Houston traffic is like a special case. And so that made it harder. The visual symptoms, it felt like my eyes couldn't focus. I also felt like really wide spaces were odd for me. So going on a walk made me feel very, very off kiltered. Obviously grocery stores were, a special kind of torture. Definitely not going to Costco, Target, anything like that was really difficult. But even like a few months into these symptoms, even if I was back home in our home state of Michigan, out on the trails walking with my kids and my family, something very peaceful, very enjoyable, even looking out into the trees really bothered me. Or there was one point where my family and I had taken the kids to the sunflower fields, which was so beautiful, so peaceful. I almost like couldn't look at the sunflowers. It was like too much. It made me feel like I was going to fall over, or walking on marshmallows. And it was so beautiful and peaceful, but I couldn't take it all in visually. And I was doing some traveling for work at the time. And even when you're like getting to your hotel room, the carpet and the wall are usually some crazy pattern at hotels. And even looking at the carpet or the walls, walking to my hotel room would throw me into hours of torture. Yeah.
What kept you moving through all this? Because this is where, at that kind of critical stage, there's kind of a fork in the road where people either decide I'm going to have to push through this, or their worlds start to shrink down. So what kept you doing all this while you were feeling so awful?
So I had recently purchased a franchise. So I knew like I have to go to these trainings. I have to move through this. But once I got past some of the trainings and travel I had to do, my world got smaller almost immediately. So by the end of June, so you're looking at, almost 6 weeks of feeling this way, I stopped eating. Like I had lost 17 pounds in 3 weeks. And I didn't have an appetite. I was so anxious. I was sleeping a lot. I just wanted to lay down. The not eating part came from also just the movement of having food on a fork and putting it to your mouth. Yes. And just the head movement would throw me into this spinning. And that was obviously really scary. And that was when, I kept seeking out doctors. I had my eyes checked again. I had my vision checked early June. But I had like some additional nerve tests done. I had also had a doctor recommend doing a CT scan. All of that came out perfect. And then I had gone to an ENT to do different tests for hearing, fluid, etc. They could not find anything wrong. The CT scan also showed my sinuses. So at one point we thought, okay, maybe there's a blockage in the sinuses, and nope, everything was perfect. I also was getting a lot of headaches, which I think also could have been because my eyes are just working so hard to take in so much information and struggling. I had a lot of dry eyes too. I did have some visual snow. I do have a little bit of some floaters in my vision that I've had for the last couple of years. That have, not gotten worse. But I was very aware of them during the dizziness versus normally where you would just not pay attention to them and they would not, obstruct your vision or whatever.
And the snow was new. The visual snow was new. Yeah. I'm so glad you mentioned that because not a lot of people do. And I have a video about visual snow. So some people come to the channel looking for like, wait, do people actually get better from that? And obviously
Yeah.
you're one of them. So
Yeah,
it's so
they
good to
do.
hear. We'll come back to that. So yeah, so a lot of this was visual, but you just kind of felt off. You were exhausted. You were headachy. You
Mhm.
couldn't eat. Wow. And then things just got worse and worse and worse. So at the peak of everything. So
Mhm.
when you were in despair and the symptoms were at their peak, what was life like at that point?
It was really dark. It was really dark. I remember like still being back home for part of the summer, and I felt like my parents had to take care of me as a 36-year-old woman and help me with the kids. My husband travels for work, so obviously he was helping as much as he could. And I remember there was a day that my dad had said, "We're going golfing. We're get up, put on your favorite golf outfit. We're the three of us, my husband, my dad, and I, we're going to go golfing." And I was like, how am I going to be able to even stand? And I mean, I really felt like I could barely wash my hair because just any movement made me feel terrible. But I remember this was the lowest point that we were golfing a certain hole, and you could hear the highway kind of by us. And there's just some trees that sort of separate. And I remember feeling like I was never going to get better. And this is the way life was going to be. Almost like I was stuck. I felt stuck, like I was broken.
Yeah.
And I had this thought, which is very unlike me, that if I just walked down there, this would all be over. I wouldn't have to live like this. And I am very much, that's not my personality. That's not my belief. It was almost like this out of body experience. And my dad had kind of walked over to me, and he saw me kind of like looking down there. And he said, "Hey, I lost you for a second. Where did you go? What's going on? I feel like I lost you." And it snapped me back to reality. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I need help. I need help. And, at that point, I had seen countless doctors, countless specialists come up with nothing and only been told anxiety, anxiety, anxiety. And at that point, that was when I decided to take a small dose of an SSRI because I was so desperate. I felt like a shell of a person. I didn't even feel any qualities of me that I had had before, who I knew myself to be. I felt like I was just going to disappear into thin air. It was awful. And I remember even my daughter saying when I was putting her to bed one night, like, "Are you going to die?" And I said, of course I said no. But in my mind, I was like, I don't know. I don't know if this is going to, be the end of my life, because I had no answers. And I really had felt almost like, am I losing my mind? Am I making this up? And I also want to say that I have a very loving, close-knit, supportive family and spouse. That was never it. But people don't really understand what you're going through, because a lot of the characteristics, they could be so many things. And so it is very easy for people to say, you know what, you've had a lot going on. It's stress. And that obviously is a very big piece of the puzzle. But
it's dismissive in the moment when you're like, this is more than just like, I'm a little stressed out. That there's something physically going on with me.
Yeah, your physical symptoms are very real. They're not in your head at all, but there's no concrete proof from a medical doctor of why they're happening. And so or I guess like it's all deduced to anxiety. But what I have learned about myself through this process is anxiety is truly a symptom. You have to figure out where it's coming from. And initially of course you're anxious when you don't feel like yourself and no one can give you a reason. And that was at the very worst, lowest point. And even looking at some pictures from that point is sort of sad because I look happy with my kids, but felt like I was dying inside.
I'm glad that you're bringing this up, because I don't know that in any of these interviews we've really talked explicitly about what it's like to try to parent when you're going through this. And unfortunately, as you and I spoke about before we came on air, this tends to strike people in the primes of their lives. Like, this is not like, oh, you're retired and don't have to take care of anyone. Not that retired people don't have to take care of people, but like, this is often people with young kids. Often people with young kids end up with these issues. Yeah.
Well, and they're all phases of parenting. It presents challenges, right? And my kids are still really little. So I have a 3-year-old and a almost 7-year-old. So, yes, they understand some things and we're out of this infant stage to a point, but they still obviously are very, they need care and love and reassurance and, obviously for you to be able to cook for them and, help bathe them before going to bed and things like that. They're not self-sufficient. And so you have that additional stress and that, these beliefs. I had these beliefs about myself that I wasn't able to care for them. And to a point I wasn't, right? Or I did the very best I could, but with the help of my husband and my family, of course. But I felt like there was a point, and this is where I think I felt better off, like they were better off without me in those worst moments, which of course I don't believe that. But in those moments I did, because I felt like I couldn't give them what they needed and that I was bringing them down. And that's a pretty terrible feeling.
Yeah. In hearing the story kind of retrospectively, I'm curious to know if you've come back and looked at how you responded, because to me, it also seems here you are smiling and being like putting on a brave face. And that seems to be kind of the type of person who ends up with neural circuit dizziness, like the kind of person who's going to do that, who's going to try to put his or her own needs kind of like under the rug and just smile and like try to do good for other people. So I'm wondering if in your exploration now of like what may have led things, I know I'm jumping way ahead, but led to this whole thing happening to you, if you've kind of looked at that, at how you put your own needs second.
Absolutely. When this began and I was initially told it was anxiety, in true type A personality fashion, I said, okay, I have some resources and I'm going to throw all my resources at this. I started working with a therapist who I actually still work with now. I don't see her nearly as frequently, but I feel like it's just very beneficial in learning about myself as a woman and the times we're living in and how, like how we handle things and how to do them in a way where we're not putting ourselves last. Right. And so now that I have a year under my belt of doing some of that work, I've been able to look at things and say, okay, I really wasn't taking care of myself. And people talk about self-care in such a way that feels like it's just a manicure or a massage.
Right.
And it's so much more than that. It really is like, are you drinking enough water? When you're exhausted, are you listening to your body saying it's exhausted and going to bed early when you can? Obviously, life has different demands. Or are you taking time to ask yourself, okay, I'm feeling really on edge. Where is that coming from? Is it because I didn't eat enough? Is it because I'm dealing with some family issues that maybe I need to find some peace with and let go? What is it that's making you feel on edge, exhausted, stretched too thin? Because I'm never going to have less stress per se, but I have now more tools in my toolbox of how to deal with those things. And I didn't have them before. And I can't put that blame on anyone necessarily. I just didn't have those tools. And I initially, I think that there's, going through the last few years, what people have gone through in and of itself is could be its own book, right? But I had to go back a lot farther and look at how I've dealt with things maybe my whole life. I grew up in a very safe, loving home. I knew my parents cared about me and did everything they could to give me a wonderful life. But my parents are boomers, okay? So let's look at how that generation deals with struggle, hard feelings.
Emotions. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. You don't talk about it. You fight through it. You white knuckle, you tough through it. And then their parents, right? We're talking about my grandparents and most people's grandparents in like my age group. They lived through war and the Great Depression. You're talking about immigration. They were faced with unimaginable things. And so they had a toughness that, it was probably really difficult to show love in the way that parents needed to feel, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so my parents showed lots of love and gentleness, but they also were tough. And you didn't make excuses for things. And you did fight through the hard things. And, that some of those qualities served me, right? I learned how to be tough. I learned how to work very hard. I also didn't really learn how to give myself grace. I didn't learn how to ask myself why I was feeling the way I was feeling. But I don't fault my parents for that, of course, but I do look at them differently and say, you know what? They are a product of their generation. Mm-hmm. And both of them also don't give themselves grace for, their own hardships or things. Or I've noticed in the last coming months, like my parents have tied a lot of their own self-worth to what they can accomplish for the people that they love. And if they can't, they feel like failures. And that is where a lot of my limiting beliefs during the triple PD came from. Is I felt unworthy. I felt unloved. I felt like I wasn't a good mother because I couldn't make these homemade meals for my family or drive my children to everything that they needed to go to, or be the successful business owner that, I have been before and can be and feel now, right? I couldn't do all of those things. So I felt very much like my life had no meaning. And I think there is something to be said about like the way we view ourselves as individuals, because your body does keep score of that. And it, evidently it took something like the triple PD for me to break that wide open and do all of this really hard work. And, even in your videos talking about like not looking for the dizziness, and don't record all of your symptoms all the time, because of course, the more you focus on it, you're just going to perpetuate that more. I was doing that because that is a part of my personality, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say any person who's type A or organized or whatever that's a bad thing, but you have to be able to turn those things off. And if you don't know how, you have to figure out the tools to do that. And I didn't have those tools at the time.
Wow. This was why I'm so excited to interview you. Like,
well, thank you.
Just bravo on everything you said. And I say this a lot, but just to kind of underline everything that you said, the stuff that dizziness brings up, it's just putting a spotlight in the cracks that are already in our foundation. It's not mm-hmm. putting new cracks in. It amplifies and makes things 1,000 times worse. So I'm not saying, that it doesn't make people's lives miserable, but when feelings of unworthiness show up, it's because the feelings of unworthiness were there. There was just nothing to shine a light on them because we were able to cope with them using the strategies that were working for us at the time. But during the healing process for people, one of the, I think, most fundamental changes that I tend to see is that people start to accept themselves as they are right now. Like this is where I am right now. And I am still a worthwhile human being. I'm still worthy of love, even though I am not at 100% yet. And when that switch flips, it reduces the pressure so much that people from there start to get better and better.
Yeah. I remember a conversation with my husband in the fall where I had really started living life again and feeling better. And he said, I don't understand exactly why, when you felt like you couldn't do all these things, why that made you feel so unworthy. And I didn't understand that question, but he said, you know, if he himself was ill or sick or debilitated, obviously not ideal. He's like, we're partners and you would pick up that slack because we're a family. And I wouldn't for one moment think that I was not worthy of being your husband or a father to these children, or also that he was never going to get better. And that just, the such different views, that's where I absolutely believe. And even in some of your recent videos talking about different types of personalities that maybe have a harder time healing, I definitely fall into that category. And where just the way that they view themselves or like their behaviors kind of keeps them stuck. And that was really profound for me because of course my husband would pick up the slack. We chose to get married and we chose to have children to care for, and we chose to have the things that we have in our life. And it is a partnership. And why did I feel like a failure when I couldn't, I guess, live up to that for those months? Right.
Right. Right. And that's, again, that stuff pre-existed long before the dizziness. It just, again, it's shown a spotlight on it.
Yeah.
And it's no one's fault. Like you said, it's no one's fault.
No.
No one's trying to make you feel that way. But again, you did a perfect job. I mean, I really have nothing to add to any of the explanation you gave, just that even well-intentioned, loving parents in like a wonderful close-knit family like yours, there are always going to be some shortfalls or some needs that aren't met. It's just the way it is, no matter how perfect the parent is. And just like you described, people who grow up in households where certain feelings aren't okay, and we're taught to kind of push through and suppress our feelings of sadness or anger. Like, no, we don't do that here. We persist, like dry those tears and keep going.
Yeah.
Again, I totally get where people are coming from. And it, as you've pointed out, it also gave you a lot of strength and a lot of skills. But then when the chips are down and you are in a situation like this, that teaches you that your own feelings of anger and sadness aren't worth being with or worth giving attention to. And that leads to a lot more suffering.
Yeah. When I first found you and started discovering your videos, some of
when
them
was that? When was that?
I first found you, let's see, like beginning of September.
Okay. So gosh. So all summer you were just, yeah. Okay.
It was dark. Yeah. Yep. So in September, remember I had been told it was anxiety. I was on a very low dose of an SSRI. It had finally, I guess, taken effect where I wasn't feeling anxious, but I still was feeling all of the visual issues, all of like the off kilter, felt like I was walking on marshmallows. My sister-in-law, who's in occupational therapy, she works at a hospital, and the physical therapist that she worked with had mentioned, hey, if Whitney doesn't seem to be getting better, she should probably look into this triple PD. And so it was like a little 2-page medical document. And I printed it, grabbed a highlighter because I'm like, okay, I'm going to highlight any of my symptoms and I'm going to take these to my doctor and see what's going on.
That's so you.
It totally tracks, right? So I'm looking at it and I start to highlight and I realize there's not enough juice in this highlighter because I'm going to highlight this whole front and back of these 2 pages. I have every single symptom. And a part of the document said, These symptoms are real. You will have real physical symptoms, even with no medical explanation. And I was like, this is it. And so then I had taken it to my doctor, and he was like, but you're saying you're feeling better and this and that. I was like, yeah, but I'm still feeling this dizziness. And he's like, okay, well, when is it the worst? And I said, going to places like Costco, the grocery store. He goes, you should just not go to those places. And I thought, what? What? Like, first off, I love both of those places. Obviously, they supply goods and things I need for my life. And what do you mean I'm not going to go? And I thought, that's a really weird solution. And at that point, that was when I wrote in the email. It was almost like a lion inside of me was like, no, enough of this. And that was when, around the time that my sister-in-law had sent me that medical journal. And I was like, okay, all of this tracks. And then I Googled triple PD too, because I wanted to see, not necessarily forums or Reddit or things like that, but I just wanted to see what tools were out there. That was when I found you and, saw that you were a real person. Yeah. And had experience and knew what you were talking about. And then what I started doing is I would start watching your videos, and then I would read all your comments. I would read that you would respond to all of your comments. And I thought, okay, this is obviously someone who has a family and has a career, and she's doing this out of the goodness of her heart because she feels that she can help people. So I'm going to believe this person, and so thankful that I did, and then that was where when I would drive or in my scary moments where I'm like, okay, I got to get through this. I can't just not drive the rest of my life. I'm in my 30s. This is crazy. And my husband travels, and we don't have any family here. So like I don't have a safety net. I had to get through this. And so that was when I would listen to your videos play through the car. If I was driving the kids to like swim lessons or something, and it was a scarier or like more high traffic area, because it was soothing to hear how your brain works and how your eyes take in information to your brain and how there's like this prediction error. And that made sense to me. And it explained why certain things looked weird, even when I wasn't anxious. And so that was when I started to get better. It was like all it took to sort of ignite this match that lit the wildfire, which was my healing, was knowing that I'm not broken. I can heal. We know there's nothing medically wrong, right? I've had every test done. And then there was times where I thought I was going to go back for second testing. I stopped testing. I was like, okay, I'm like, this is very expensive. I'm not getting any answers. And now I know what's going on. So I almost had to self-diagnose. And then I took the information to my doctors, which they gave me the diagnosis so that my insurance could cover more balanced therapy, which I want to say to anyone watching, you don't necessarily need to have all of that. So if you don't have the resources for those things, please don't feel like you can't heal, because that's not true. A lot of the exercises in your videos actually helped me more than being at this balance center, which was very helpful. But you don't necessarily need that to start to get better.
Yeah. Well, and I've seen people go through rounds and rounds of it. And
yeah,
we're not dealing with a physical dysfunction. I mean, we're dealing with a physical dysfunction, but we're not dealing with a physical injury. So
right.
It helps in the sense that it helps your brain learn that movements are safe, but there are lots of other ways to show your brain that movements are safe.
Yeah. And so I had gone twice a week for, I think, 8 to 12 weeks. And at the point of like me graduating from that, I kept saying, what if this comes back? And the physical therapist said, you know what, Whitney? Like, it's normal to feel some dizziness. It's actually a part of us biologically, which I know you talk about that. And she's like, every time my alarm goes off in the morning and I jump up too fast, I'm dizzy for a good 5 to 10 minutes until my body and brain settle down and realize that I'm safe. And that was when I was like, okay, no more doctors. I'm gonna do this myself. And I really only made it like halfway through your program before I was significantly better to the point where I was enjoying my life. So everything's really bad May to September. September is starting to get better. I have this confidence that, okay, I know what is going on. And I'm going to start working on it. I'm going to do the work, right? And then, I'm still seeing a therapist a couple times a month. And so,
this is the mental health therapist, to be clear, not the physical therapist. Yep.
Correct. Sorry. And she was like, wow, okay, so let's talk about this. You have these physical symptoms that are also connected to some emotions. So let's work on those. And so that's what I had been doing. And I would say I was probably by Christmas, this past Christmas time, I was probably, if you were saying a percentage, like 90% healed, like really living life, driving in the rain, no issues, no panic attacks, living normally, if you will. And then after, January, I'm like, okay, I don't want to be on this medication for anxiety anymore. And so I was working with the doctor who put me on it. And she was like, I think this is fair. Let's try to titrate off of it. Like, you're doing all this work. We know what was going on. You have the self-awareness, like there's, some limiting beliefs about yourself that have probably always been there. And then you came upon a tougher time in your life and that was just cracked wide open. And so got off of that medication, and actually one of the side effects is dizziness. And so I really had to amp myself up for that. I had to make sure, let's clear the schedule.
Look at you taking care of yourself.
Yeah, like all the tools in my toolbox, like, I had my few close friends that really understood me, like be there. And I was extremely dizzy coming off of this medication. I came off of it very slow. It took about a month to get off of it. And there was a good 5 straight days where it was like the early stages of it was bad. But I had to say, you're not going backwards. It's not getting worse. It's not starting over. We know medically this is a side effect. And once I got through that and realized that I didn't need that specifically for what was happening to my body, that was like the last piece of the puzzle, which I know we talked about this before. I'm not anti-medication. I know it serves a time. It's a time and a place. It can save lives depending on what people are going through. What medication did for me is it made me see that even when the anxiety was away, that all my symptoms were still there. And so it gave me validation that, okay, this is not anxiety. Anxiety is a byproduct of everything that I'm experiencing. And it made me fight for answers. So it was, I guess it was necessary. I don't necessarily regret it. It's a part of my healing journey. And, I've been off of it since January time and have not felt anxious outside of, what is a healthy form of feeling anxious, right? Like when an airplane's going to land or take off and you're like, whoo, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those feelings, those are very normal. And one thing that I thought was really interesting about my experience, or just like the human experience, is the times we live in right now. There's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of noise. There's, you're connected all the time, whether it be the internet or social media or all the activities you're involved in or whatever. Is we don't pay attention to our bodies in the way that we our bodies were designed so uniquely to let us know when certain things are not right. But we've lost the ability to tap into, okay, I have a kink in my neck. Is it really because I was looking at my phone, or is it because I'm tense because I've been under stress for 6 months? Well, then all of a sudden when you're hit with something like chronic dizziness, all of a sudden you notice everything. And so one of my other symptoms was like a popping in my ears.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that too. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So, and I had all the tests, and I know you're an audiologist, so you know all the tests I had done. And then the doctor said, I think you're noticing something that's always been there. but you didn't notice it before. And I was like, what? Your ears are just going to pop all the time? Well, evidently they do. You just don't notice it because your body's always working to like keep it at its best self, whether you're taking care of it or not. Right. And so even if I were to yawn or do something now, my ears are going to make that same popping, but it's not alarming to me because I know that I'm healthy and I'm fine. But that was like, and then you sort of like seek it out, right? You're like, okay, well, if I do this, is it going to pop again? Or if I do this, is it going to make me dizzy? Or last time, walking to the mailbox made me dizzy. I'm going to try again today and see if it makes me dizzy. Almost like I was looking for it and noticing all these things that were wrong. That's not the way to go about it. that takes some time.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's not even voluntary a lot of the time, like you're saying, especially, again, I'm not saying this applies to everyone, but many people, like you're saying, are totally out of touch with their bodies. And so then when they are like sprung into like extremely being in touch with their bodies, which is a hypervigilance thing, it's just the nervous system being on high alert. It's looking for this kind of stuff. And it's letting you know about everything that could potentially be dangerous. Mm-hmm. There's such a contrast that they just don't know what's real and what's not anymore. Like what's normal and what's not. Like, Yoni, is it normal that, my toe goes numb every so often? I'm like, yeah, like stuff happens. It's a biological system. Your body is doing weird stuff all the time. But most of the time we're so tuned out, we don't even notice that stuff. And now you're like ultra tuned in. Somewhere in the middle is the way to be, right? But that's not something that comes naturally to people.
No. And I see a chiropractor once a month, and highly recommended if you have the ability to do that. And she would say, I don't think like your neck is fine. Mm-hmm. She's like, the tenseness that you're feeling, and this went on for months. She's like, you are not taking care of yourself. And I was like, yeah, I am. I'm here. And she's like, yeah, but you're not stretching at home. You're not getting out and, getting some movement every day. You're like, I see this in women in your age group or business owners or just anyone with the personality, more of that, I guess, uptight personality, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I thought that pain radiating on the one side of my neck, and now I don't get that. But if I were to get it, that is a warning sign for me. Like you are outside of your window of tolerance of what is happening. And so once I get to that place, which hasn't really happened in the last, 6 months or so, but if it starts to, I have to really look inward and say, okay, what's really necessary for me to be dealing with right now? Can certain things wait? What can't wait and what can wait? And that just body awareness is something I think we've just really lost in the last however many years. And now I'm just really, I am grateful now that I know how to pay attention to those things in a healthy way, not a, oh gosh, what's that? Because that's how I would have been last summer.
Right. But you're really touching on something that I was hoping to ask you about, because I happen to know, spoiler alert, you are 100% recovered. And part of being 100% recovered is also sustaining recovery and like changing things, because you don't want to go back to the way things were. You don't want to go back there, right? Mm-mm. So this one thing that you're talking about right now is you've had to change to get better. Mm-hmm. You've had to change, and you've had to change the way you treat yourself. And being willing to take time to check in with yourself and say, hey, how am I doing right now? Like for real, not like, yeah, I'm fine because I'm meeting my own expectations for myself. But oh no, what is my body actually telling me about how I'm doing right now? Like that's a huge skill. And it's one that people are lucky to learn from this, because it's going to stave off so many problems later on down the road when they learn it.
Absolutely. And I don't remember which person you interviewed, but they talked about, obviously they're in a place of being recovered and they have joy again in their life and they feel good. I remember them talking about how this was a blessing. And at first, it almost can make you a little frustrated if you're in the pitfalls of all of this.
Yes,
and so I want to be really sensitive about that and say, like, I understand exactly what it feels like to feel like life has no meaning and that you feel broken and that you will never get better. And that as an adult, people are literally not believing you, which is a strange feeling because it makes sense when you're a kid and people don't believe you. But when you're a grown adult, and people don't believe you, it's very insulting and discouraging. But I can honestly say at this point, which I understand is a place of being healed, I was probably never going to fix or adjust or improve these parts of myself or these parts of my life without something so dramatic happening, because I was just so strong-headed that I was going to do things the way that I thought was right. I was going to always white knuckle. And so I can now say it was a blessing. It showed me all the parts that I needed to grow. It showed me where I needed to heal. It brought awareness to things that maybe did not really matter, especially as a mom with young kids, right? It's really easy to get caught up in all the details and really like your kids don't really care if you didn't put all the laundry away that day. They care if you're happy, if you spent time with them, if they feel seen, heard, loved, etc. And like, I wasn't even able to experience some joy because I was so caught up in all these things that didn't matter before. Like, okay, are we, eating all organic, and are we outside, and are we in these activities and all those? Yes. Okay. All those things are great and have a place, but like just simple things matter. Are we all healthy? Are we loved? Are we connecting as a family? Am I feeling connection with my spouse? Just the things that really matter. And I wasn't putting such an emphasis on that as I was of like checking off all the to-do lists and does everyone have what they need? And I guess you could even say just striving for perfection, which is something that I don't think started when I became a mother. I think it started as a little girl. And so just seeing it from a different perspective I feel like I prayed so hard for so many weeks and months for my life to just go back to what it was before the dizziness, somewhere knowing it never would. And now I'm glad that it didn't, because I get to look at things differently and feel very grateful for a second chance at, even this summer, making memories with kids and feeling like I can do things without just being like bedridden, essentially.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And again, just what a privilege to get to see you on the other side like this.
Thank you.
I know it was not a simple or easy process. It takes a lot of courage to do it.
It does. And I feel like when you are experiencing these things, and I know some people have had it a lot worse than what I had it, I know that it feels like you've lost that. You've lost that fight or that courage or that belief. And that's why this community is so special, is because, you can absolutely heal even if no one believes you except this community, because you have real people sharing real stories. And then you as a professional, not just sharing real stories, but explaining how our bodies work and that we're not broken and that you can essentially heal yourself with the right tools. And awareness of, your own behaviors and your own things and even the emotions tied to it. I fought that. I was like, no, I have a great life. There's nothing wrong. I'm tough. I'm good. Like, I'm so fortunate. I am so fortunate. I'm not going to have a pity party about anything I've gone through. One thing I also want to address too is like, even as someone who had a very wonderful, loving childhood, when I was a little girl, about my daughter's age, I lost my best friend to childhood cancer.
Oh.
And it was something that was excruciating. And we didn't know she had cancer. She was, out of school for about a week. And I remember, being a little girl, missing my best friend and hoping for her to come back. And then she had gotten a fever and she had passed away. And later, autopsy reports showed that she had had brain cancer. So the fever took her life because she was in a compromised state. So around that time is when I became uptight, a perfectionist, wanting things to always go perfect, because in my child brain, I believed that if things were perfect all the time, nothing bad could happen. And I only figured a lot of that out, obviously, through the work of a therapist. But where those feelings came from, because I don't feel like my parents wanted me to be perfect. I don't feel like they pushed that on me by any means. And like just being this achiever or like wanting things to go a certain way. And if they didn't, feeling really disappointed or just kind of being worried about worst case scenario. A lot of that came from the trauma of losing someone so close to me at such an impressionable age. And that stays with you. And if you don't heal through those things or understand where it comes from or how to process through that, it's going to come out in different ways. And for me, it came out into this type A personality, hard to relax, doesn't give myself grace. And now as a woman in her 30s is learning to make sense of that, because that is probably where that feeling of, as soon as I'm sick, feeling like I'm sick and I'm never going to get better. Well, plenty of people get sick with lots of very scary things and they get better. So why wouldn't I? But I couldn't understand that at the time and be able to calm myself down enough to do the work that I needed to do. And I know you had talked about before that sometimes you will experience some dizziness and that your brain doesn't freak out, where you're like, okay, I can feel these things. And then I take a moment, check in with myself, and it goes away. But someone like me before a lot of this would ruminate on that and like, oh my gosh, why am I feeling this way? Or what's going on? Or where's this coming from? And oh no, it's worse. And why isn't it getting better? And oh, I need to Google, or oh, I need to see this doctor. I had to take it down a notch and look at it for what it was. And that, honestly, that was the hardest part, is being able to take some of these personality traits and sort of put them on the back burner and say, you do sort of have to be a rag doll and let the feeling pass. If you are in a safe environment, right? You're not behind the wheel or something. Sure. Like that. Like being able to say, like, it's going to pass. I'm going to get through it. And when I started writing my email to you, I was still getting dizzy spells every day for 20-minute increments, where now I might feel like that whoosh, I don't know, once a month or once every few weeks. And I'm like, oh, okay, we're fine. Or like if I first walk into like a busy grocery store, I'll feel it for a second and then I'll be like, it's fine. You're fine. I'll have to say, okay, brain, you see it. We're gonna adjust, and you move through it, where before I couldn't. And I stopped writing the email because I started living my life again. And I said, no, I got to go back and I got to finish this, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are healed, but they are living their life again and almost not wanting to backtrack in a way and talking about it. But see, I look at it more of like, one of the last steps to my healing is sharing it, coming full circle, showing other people that they can get through it. And also even just showing myself that I can get through it. And that even if I feel a feeling of dizziness or whatever, doesn't mean I'm going backwards. It doesn't mean it's back. It doesn't mean it's never going to go away. It just means my body's saying, hey, slow down.
Amazing. I'm so glad you did come back to that, because that email was just epic email. And this this is going to help so many people. So you're definitely paying it forward by doing this, by volunteering your time this way.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for you and your community.
Oh, like I said, it's just, I know that there are a lot of videos of me. So people are like, oh my gosh, you're like a real person. But for me also, when I meet people like you who I've heard from and who got better, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're a real person too. I'm helping real people. That's so great. Not just names on the screen. I'm helping real people who have like children and real lives and who are like members of communities and have families who love them. Like, this is so important. These conversations, I know what I do really matters, but like these conversations always remind me just how much, how important it is. Cause hearing your story, one of the things I think that's going to come up in the comments is people are going to be like, she got better so fast. I've had this for 20 years. And I'm like, well, I see that a lot. And there weren't YouTube channels like mine 20 years ago. So people have been told for 20 years that there's something horribly wrong with them and they can't get better. It doesn't just, you were fortunate enough to find me in the first few months.
Exactly. Right. Because nothing, there was no answers. There was not even, I didn't have any like courage or strength or anything to like pull from myself anymore. Right. Like I had nothing left to give. And at this point, no one's believing me. Right. Or people are like, you just got to relax. And it's like, well, when has that worked for people telling them to relax? Right. Yeah. And so that is where the World Wide Web has served in a positive way, because we have too much information. There's so much information out there. There's a lot of misinformation, and it's really hard to get to the good. And so, I'm a product of the times we're living in, having the internet and being able to find you fast. And, as simple as the physical therapist at the hospital that my sister-in-law works at as an occupational therapist. And then that chatter. And then me saying, okay, all of this tracks, let's figure out how to attack this at all angles. And, I would probably, without your program and therapy together, I don't know that I would have healed as fast. I know not everyone has the ability to do both of those things, and I understand that. Where I was mentally and physically was in true crisis mode, right? I wasn't eating. Okay. It was very hard to do basic tasks. And so perhaps if I had come upon you sooner and not been in crisis mode, perhaps I would have been able to get the self-awareness I needed to calm my nervous system to the point where your videos and your exercises made sense to my body. But it was almost too late for me to do it alone. So both of those, I credit both of those things, right? And yeah, I guess technically I did get better kind of fast. I know people will ask about timelines. So you figure really sick May to September, starting to get better September, feeling really good and feeling joy by the holidays, which when you have kids, I mean, that's a stressful time, right? Sure. Being able to carve out some joy in addition to all the things you need to do for all the things. And then to really feeling like getting close to that 100% or being at 100%, like late winter. And even now I have to remind myself, the other day I had a little bit of that feeling of dizziness that lasted about 10 minutes. I had to remind myself, this doesn't mean it's back. It doesn't mean I'm not healed. It means my body just did not like what I was doing. And it was as simple as, trying to fix breakfast for kids, unload a dishwasher, reload a dishwasher, the up down movements, that can just make, saying like, hey, slow down. You don't need to be anywhere in a rush. And I think someone had written a comment to you like that about rushing.
Yes.
And you had said, why are you rushing? And I was like, that's weird. What do you mean? It was like such a profound question that I never considered to ask myself, like, Whitney, why are you rushing? There's not a fire and we don't need to be anywhere in the next 10 minutes. So really, why are you rushing? And that was a concept that never registered to me until I was like, yeah, why are you rushing?
Yes.
And that's where it's like everyone needs to take on so much, do it faster, better, no relax, white knuckle. And it's like, we have got to get away from that, especially people that are dealing with chronic dizziness. You have to fight against the current and do what you need to do to truly take care of yourself and take the time that's needed, and don't put that time stamp on it. I don't want anyone to be like, whoa, well, Whitney technically a year later is better and I'm still not. Well, I found my resources early, and that is what helped me get there. And most people didn't.
Right. Or they were given the opposite. They were noceboed. I mean, they were told you can't get better. This poor person on my YouTube channel recently commented with like a quote from a study that just said, the outcomes are really poor and most people don't recover. And I'm like,
that's crazy.
First of all, that is incorrect. The studies out there are valuable sources of information, but they are poorly controlled, very small studies. They do not represent the whole population that struggles with PPPD symptoms. In fact, there's a study that shows that across the population, 5 to 10% of people have unexplained dizziness or visual symptoms without any kind of diagnosis at any given time. So it's much more common. Most of those people just completely spontaneously get better. So yeah, anyway. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's just awful but if you're given those messages, how are you supposed to get better? Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you think of I know you're a mother, but can you imagine if you just never encouraged your children and you said, you know what, honey, I know you want to play baseball, but you're just like not any good. And it really doesn't matter how much you practice. Like you're never going to be a professional. And you know what? Maybe they're never going to be a professional, but who cares? Right. They're going to have enjoyment and it's just part of life. And you learn lots of life skills from being in a team sport. Right. But if you never encourage them, why would they ever feel any self-worth? And so when you take an adult who keeps seeing medical professionals,
and
I don't want to take away,
they take the agency away. You're never
and they're saying, you must be under a lot of stress. And, I kept thinking, well, I have 2 little kids. Yes. I have a business and, I'm living in America. Like there's stress and there's things, but those things aren't going to go away. So what is the solution to it? And the solution was how you're managing that stress and how you're adapting to some of these changes so your body can sort of get back to baseline. And I was really tired. I think people talk about a lot of fatigue. I was very, very tired for months every day. Like when my children would take naps, I had to take a nap too. I had to. And then even when I started forcing myself to get out and move, per the instruction in your courses, like don't avoid these things because it's just telling your brain it's dangerous. On the weekends, what we would do is we would do a lot of like family walks and stuff, knowing that as soon as all of that was over, I was sort of going to be down for the count for a couple of hours and need to take it easy. And almost like let my body register what had happened and just continuing to do those things. Because I think someone had said, maybe you had said, your brain has to feel it to heal it. And once you understand that, it makes those episodes a lot less scary because your brain is almost trying to like recalibrate what it's taking in.
Yeah, it has to be exposed to the thing that you needed to rewire, right? Like you can't just like, again, I'm all for doing emotional work. In fact, I mean, that's what I do with my clients. It's all emotional, right? But then it gives them kind of the courage to go do the things because they're still not going to feel great the first time they do something, but the brain needs that input. That I think you might be thinking about the interview I did with Mark, not the most recent Mark. It was the first Mark that I interviewed where we were talking about where he was walking through downtown, in the city where he lives. And he was like seeing all the buildings look super wonky. And he kept reminding himself, this is exactly what my brain needs in order for me to heal. I need to see it wonky. it needs to look wonky so my brain fixes it.
Yes. Yes. And that gave me courage to get back out there and doing stuff. Cause I was someone who, you know, would work out and do different things. And then, you know, only in the last few months have I started doing like more extended, like walking and then getting into light workouts. Cause I was afraid to feel that feeling again. And now that I understand it, and not just where I'm saying it out loud and not believing it, but where my brain actually believes it and my heart believes it, that this doesn't mean that it's going back or that I'm not healed. It just means certain things are still going to feel a little weird. I mean, like I said, just the other day, I did feel dizzy for about 10, 20 minutes. And I had to remind myself, this does not mean you are not healed. This just means my brain needs to adjust to this and I need to slow down.
Right. And I, you know, I wanted to also say to that, I like to use myself as kind of the normal control in these conversations, because when I go for a long walk with the dog and it's hot outside, I'll come back and I'll feel like I'm walking on a trampoline for a few minutes. And my brain just doesn't care. My brain's not, it looks at that and it's like, oh, that's weird. And then it just kind of recalibrates. I forget about it. And before I know it, if I go back and think about it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's gone now. Your brain actually is probably still a little bit alert to those sensations, a little more alert to those sensations than my brain is right now. But the sensations you're describing are normal. And there are times when I need to lie down, or for me, my most significant mind body symptom was back pain. So sometimes my back will hurt, and it's normal for people's backs to hurt sometimes. And it just doesn't mean anything to me anymore. And so now it just passes and we move on. So again, I think it's really important for people to understand they're not going to live a dizzy-free life, nor would we want them to, because as your therapist told you, dizziness is actually a very important function. It tells your brain that something needs to change about your environment right now. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this has been absolutely fabulous. You shared so much. And I mean, you gave so much good advice. I'm not even going to try to sum up everything that you said, but I would like to give you the chance to just reiterate your bottom line. So like, if you had to give just one piece of advice to people who are in the midst of PPPD or MDDS or vestibular migraine or any of these other chronic dizziness conditions, what would your advice be?
My advice would be to take inventory of yourself and how you react to certain emotions and feelings and life stressors, and see what you can adjust to make your life better while you are healing through this, because those adjustments will permanently make your life better. And you can absolutely heal even if no one believes you except this community. You can, because no one really believed me. And I am healed, living a fulfilling, happy life from chronic dizziness.
Wow. This was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much. We're recording this on a weekend. So you really went out of your way to save some time to do this and to volunteer your time to help other people. So thank you. I can't thank you enough.
Well, and you as well. It's your weekend too. I appreciate you.
Well, it is, but these are my favorite. Of course, we're gonna do this.
Yes.
Thank you. So, folks, I hope you enjoyed that. I know you learned a lot. And if you have questions or comments, just drop them below. And if you enjoyed this, please share the video, please subscribe to my channel, all that. And I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much, Whitney.
Thanks, Dr. Yo.
Take care.
Bye.